Hello, it's Pastor Pete here, and I'm making a video in which I try to explain something that seems new and exciting and right for this time. It's a thing that's been rising out of the thinking and the experience and the inspiration of several people around North America and even beyond that. If you watch this and there's any part of it that you want to know more about, just leave a comment and I'll go to work ready to address it. It's very likely, just so you know ahead of time, that I will not engage in a lot of writing back and forth in the comments. I want my communication to be in these videos. I find for myself, I don't spend a lot of time reading comments on or leaving comments on other people's channels. But I assure you I will read them. I just might not engage in conversation through the channel. A colleague of mine in California has, for the last 3 or 4 years, experienced an interesting life trajectory. He is a pastor, like I am, in the Christian Reformed Church. And he and I, although we've only maybe met or been in the same room a couple of times in our lives, we know through some internet conversations, some email conversations, that we have very similar interests, even though we have different personalities. And so both of us have done a lot of conversing, mostly via email, about the church, and that's the church with a capital C. That's usually when I'll do the quotation marks. So that's the institution. So about the church as an institution and the church as the on-living spirit, heart, arms, and legs of Jesus. Back in 2016, we were both intrigued by aspects of the Jordan Peterson phenomenon when it broke into public awareness. And his name is Pastor Paul Vanderklay, set up a YouTube channel at that time and started making commentary videos on Jordan Peterson's videos. Paul's channel can be found via a link in the notes that I'm reading from, that I hope to remember to post with the video so you can check it out. This led to him and myself and others organizing what are called meetup groups through an app that facilitates that kind of action around these same subjects. Mine at the time was called the Jordan Peterson Phenomenon Meetup. Many interesting encounters and experiences have come out of that for those of us involved. And now he, and I as well, and others, feel this all moving or being taken into new territory. And the name that Paul has coined for this is estuary. The name is both a symbol, a metaphor, and a descriptor. Estuaries, and here too I'll have links to the Wikipedia articles about this, but estuaries are transition zones where river environments and marine environments come together, where they meet. Anytime there is a transition area where one biological community or ecosystem meets and integrates with another, that area is known as an ecotone. So estuaries, as ecotones, as fitting in that category, have both marine influences, such as tides, waves, and the influx of saline water, salty water. They have that, and the river influences, such as flows of fresh water and sediment, and so these mix in the estuary. And that action makes estuaries among the most productive natural habitats in the world. They're usually referred to as river deltas, where all that sediment settles out. Borrowing Paul Vanderklay's metaphorical language and imagery, in one of his videos, he says the church has been given a river of living water, but has built walls and dams that keep the water in. So the river is not flowing as it should. What the church has then is a reservoir of dammed water that is on its way to becoming stagnant because it's still. I would add, in terms of some of my own interpretation of that, not only has the church built walls and dams higher and higher to contain this living water, but it has often then built moats and bridges or drawbridges, which you need passwords and need to know secret handshakes to be able to cross and enter the sanctuary. Estuary is about getting that river flowing again, creating spillways, about bringing it out and into and onto the land, and even to the very edge of the land where the dangerous and mysterious sea creatures live. I am very enthused about the idea of this movement. It's still finding its way. It's still being thought through, and this video is even part of thinking it through for myself. This is a different kind of cultural space, estuary. It's a place or a space called estuary. And I think Paul is right in being adamant that it's not the estuary. It's more of a movement or a kind of space or a kind of culture than it is a particular culture or a particular space. So the rest of this video is intended as my explanation of why I'm so eager about it. Because it, to many people, might just seem like something that pops out of the blue. But in my own experience and history, this has been developing for a long, long time. Basically most of my life. I won't be able to touch on all of that, but I'll touch on a few pieces of it. I have a long personal history of experiences of connecting with, as we call them from within the church, unchurched folks. People who don't know the secret handshake, don't know the password. There is no real secret handshake, it's a metaphor. For one example, clients when I was a wholesale florist, I had a couple of clients, and in conversation, I was experimenting with what we call evangelism. How do I let the people that I deal with every day understand what my beliefs are? And two of them came to a point where they were interested in checking out the church that I was part of. And so they both came once and never again. And both of them explained to me somewhat of why. I don't have time to tell all that now. It's also very interesting to me that shortly after, a few months or a year later, after they both tried out the church, I was in a struggle myself in terms of my future direction and my sense of calling. And within 1 week's period of time, each of these ladies said to me, "Hey, Pete, has anybody ever told you you'd be a good pastor? Like if you had a church, you'd be the kind of pastor that I would want." Now, I never specifically started paying attention to that, but I've heard that at least twice more from people outside of the church in my life. I also have the experience, and my family kind of laughs at this, and they've been patient about it. But I need to preface this by saying I don't necessarily have any belief that I invite this. I don't really even enjoy it, although it makes great stories later on. but I have the experience of people randomly starting to tell me their life story. Here's just one example. My youngest daughter had been visiting me on Vancouver Island, and it was time to get her back on the ferry to get back home. And so I went to pay for her ferry fare, and the clerk saw my Dutch last name on the credit card, pronounced it in Dutch, and then went into this whole story while the ferry is about to leave, while my daughter is patiently waiting with her arms folded with a kind of an annoyed smirk because it's happening to dad again, told me about how he used to be the florist for the Queen of Holland, the main florist. But then how he got brain cancer and how he has had 3 surgeries, brain surgeries. And I forget the details of how he now ended up in Canada collecting money for the ferry. But I heard this whole story when I was more interested in going and seeing my daughter off. So I have a lot of that's happened to me, and I don't know what it means. Almost every time I have this little conversation with God about, like, what was that about? What's that? What's that all about? And then I have at least currently 3 connections with people outside of institutional Christianity. I've had others that have fallen away over time, um, who seem to appreciate having conversation with me. And I willingly do that. I don't know what it's all about, but it seems to be somewhat unusual. So I often wonder, what's that all about? And then I've had the experience, and so here I'll mention for the first time that I'm a specialized transitional minister. So I come into churches. Many times it's after a long-term pastor has left and they just want to do some refreshing. Sometimes I'm assigned to go there because there's been a hard parting between a pastor and a congregation. And there's various other reasons, but those are the 2 main ones why a church might enlist a transitional minister to do some focused reflecting before they move to their next pastor, some healing and all those kinds of things. So that's a big part of my life. And I have had the experience various times in that where I have something that I feel is important for them to learn as leaders. It's usually leadership that I deal with, where I'm sharing something biblical and something wise as a lesson. And I look up and the church leaders are completely glazed over and they're basically deer in the headlights, and they do not seem to be understanding or valuing what I'm talking about. One example would be the importance of monitoring your own emotional state and knowing where you are emotionally as things happen in meetings and things like that. So they glaze over. They're not interested. And I have that more often than I have that too often, uh, and I don't like it. And then one particular one not too long ago, within a week of that experience, I'm in a meetup with my Jordan Peterson people, and I share the very same information and a little story that illustrates the struggle. And at least one person finds that life changing. I mean, that's a bit of an overstatement, but he later told me that it really put some things in his life right into perspective in a way that he'd never seen before. And again, I have this conversation with God, like, what's that all about? With people outside of the church, he and I went for lunch to talk about it more. So I'm going to reflect for a bit on why I think some of that happens. To me, some of these connections and where people, and one of the main ones I think is that I make a point of not being what I call a used car salesman who needs to close the Jesus deal. That's kind of what we would call, on the extreme of Christianity, an evangelical approach, where, but if you put it in gunslinger language, it's about getting another notch on your holster, or on the handle of your pistol, of someone that you prayed the sinner's prayer with and they were converted. I've met a number of people that have been through that, and it didn't take, so to speak. So I work hard not to be a used car salesman who needs to close the Jesus deal. I focus on just being who I am in the situation, or who it feels like I need to be, with integrity. And I set aside any other agenda. When I am involved in uh, what would be called now an estuary event, with that modality to it, I consciously, often on the way there, set aside my need to defend any particular aspect of Christianity, and I make myself available to be, as who I am with the faith that I have, who I need to be in that situation. There's a theological root to some of this. So in our version of Reformed theology, conversion, as it's called, closing the Jesus deal, is way more up to God than it is up to me or us. And that's a comfortable thing to lean into and to rely on, when in these encounters with people outside of the capital C church or the small c church. So in that approach, if faith or my beliefs come up in the course of the conversation and relationship, only then do I speak about it. It's not upfront. For the rest, I do my best to live within my faith, integrated into my being, into who I am in every particular moment. So I say those things to give you some sense of how the questions that estuary culture and space answers have been ebbing and flowing in my life, much of my life. And this feels like an answer. In my specialized transitional ministry work, I get to experience, unfortunately, pretty firsthand and pretty clearly, how congregations get stuck. Stuck in tradition, in empty ritualism, and many, many other things that they believe to be Christianity. Again, this is something I can say more about in a separate video. And I've seen churches struggle. They're so eager to connect with new people and to bring new people in that almost that eagerness might even scare them away. I don't know how many churches I've been in where someone comes and visits once and never comes back. And you wonder what that's all about. Now, within the walls of the church, within the sanctuary and the cultural space of that sanctuary, within the bubble of the church, we'll amongst ourselves easily talk about people today are not interested in God. They're not living God's way, and they're not coming here to find out. They're not interested in the Bible. That has proven to be false. What's proven to be true is that the people outside of those walls just don't see the church as the place where they can find value in God, where they can encounter God or spiritual growth, or where the sacred scripture can be communicated to them well. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. Again, a whole other video. But what I want to say today is that one is on us, on the church. And I find very few people reflecting on how that comes about, on what the cause and source of that is. And so what we do is that within the church, we keep talking as if getting people into the worship service is somehow going to magically, it's magical thinking in some ways, to change them somehow. If they could just sit in the pew one time and the pastor deliver that one awesome sermon that one time, boom, there we go. And we talk that way. And we talk as if we have that expectation. Why aren't people coming to church? Is part of what hints at that. You know that in my life, personal and professional life as a pastor, being around pastors, I have not heard one story. I've heard many, many stories, but I've not heard one story of a person coming into church and having that experience change them overnight. Not one. There are a couple where it sort of led to something else, but not that magical event that we seem to expect. So that's one of the mistaken views we have within the church, where we need to learn to go out and meet the world rather than wait for them to come to us. And rather than even lure them with goodies and treats and free things and whatever people do. Karen Wilk, another pastoral colleague who lives in my area actually, has written a great book about this called Don't Invite Them to Church. And then the subtitle is Moving from a Come and See to a Go and Be Church. And so she's done, and others with her have done a lot of work on making neighborhood groups that are similar to churches, but not really. Well, Estuary is one step beyond that, even. I want to go back to the Jordan Peterson phenomenon because that woke me up to something. And the moment that happened was when people started showing enough interest in hearing Jordan Peterson, a psychology prof from the University of Toronto, speak about the Bible, that they were paying good money and filling theaters, filling venues in Toronto to hear these lectures. If I have my details right, they even had to move to bigger places because more people wanted to hear. And I'm thinking this is going on in an area of Toronto where there are probably within a few blocks at least 6 big churches sitting empty that you can participate in for free and hear at the very least similar messages about the Bible. And when I saw that, when that kind of gripped me, a realization came to me rather starkly. There's something for the church to learn from this. Within the walls, within the church culture bubble, we easily talk about people not being interested and people paying to hear lectures on the Bible show that to be false. And we better pay attention as the church, both capital C and small c. We better pay attention. Now I want to go a little bit to my own theories of life and my own theology, because in my own understanding and study, I've come to see that the Bible is teaching that spreading the ways of the kingdom is the intent or purpose of the church, with both capital and small c existing. Expanding the number of people who are living by the ways of the kingdom of God. That's the point. And some of the sermons in that regard are on this channel as well. So in other words, the institution of the church is to be the delivery mechanism or the demonstration mechanism of people who live in the world according to the ways of the kingdom of God, not the ways of the kingdoms of this world. However, what happens is that institutional sociological needs begin slowly but surely over time to overrule or constrain that purpose. It happens in almost any movement where it starts free and alive and vital and exciting, and then slowly rules and regulations come into place, and it's less and less effective. And that's the same thing here. And so I want to illustrate that a little bit with, so the budget for paying a pastor or the budget for maintaining a building, even though it's not being used during the pandemic, starts to limit what the movement of Jesus can do. Oh, we can't afford to support that homeless person. We have to pay the heating bill. And over time, patterns and language and cultural expressions develop that no longer have relevance outside of the castle with the moat and the bridge that's holding water inside of it as well. None. It's irrelevant what's going on inside those walls. It's a novelty, a curiosity that hardly piques anyone's interest. So to give an extreme example of how these patterns develop, the password to enter the walled community can become something like washed in the blood. And that sounds really, really, really weird and gruesome to people outside the castle with the moat that's holding the living water. Living water that is stagnating rapidly. I could give many more examples, but I hope you get the idea there. And I hope you're somewhat alarmed. Hopefully just to a healthy level. Because a healthy level of alarm can bring change. A panic level of alarm just brings resistance and shutting down. So the pandemic that is going on as I record this is actually a good opportunity to stand back and re-examine what the church is. The church with a capital C and the church with a small c. I know of a number of, prior to the pandemic, already underused church facilities that sat completely unused for several months as everyone stayed home, and most of those then moved church activities online. The fact that we could do that, what does it say about the owning of a building as a church? And all the expense of that. But that too is not what this video is about. I do want you to note that we may also have something to learn from Alcoholics Anonymous, from AA, in this particular thing. AA was the first to develop and practice the wisdom that seems really obvious, at least to me now, and they made it a policy, they have it as a policy, not to own buildings and not to have paid or official spokespeople. As a movement, AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, has flourished and it continues to do so. Partly because of the good that it has done for many, and other 12 Steps groups have done for many, but also partly because it doesn't have the constraints of a building and paid staff. So that gives you some of the background as to why I think estuary is a move or a movement for our time today. Hopefully it gives you some idea of why I'm convicted that we need more than ever to break out of the walls. We need to let the living water flow again so that the world out there, outside of the walls, can meet the river and can be spiritually refreshed. This calls for people, some people at least, to go out along the river, maybe all the way to the estuary where it meets the sea, and encounter whatever they encounter and explain what this river of fresh water is and is doing. That's it for now. Till you see me again. Stay safe, stay well.